everyone, time for your Week 7 overview in Humanities 103 Mythology. And you'll see by my title slide there that we're moving into a really interesting aspect of this unit, and that is flood stories. Before we dive into this week's tasks, let's just talk about flood myths in general for a minute. So some things that we want to think about in the next 2 weeks are, number one, why are flood myths so ubiquitous? Just in the way that we talked about creation myths, we're going to see that almost every culture around the world and throughout time has a story about some sort of cataclysmic deluge. And those stories have some common features as well. So the flood was usually caused or sent by a deity or a group of deities in response to what people were doing. People were behaving badly, or they were not acting properly. And in some stories, they're warned, maybe again and again, and they don't listen, they don't learn what they're supposed to do. And so the deities just say, okay, we're done. Time to wipe out this disobedient population and start over. And so that's another key feature, is that the floodwaters have a cleansing effect on humanity. They wipe out not everybody. There's always a few remnant survivors to start over again. And so now we can start over fresh, have a rebirth, say Civilization 2.0, and these new people are going to be much better behaved and listen to their deities from now on. A lot of myths also feature some sort of hero who is the person who saves that one remnant of the population and gets them started on their new and improved existence. Okay, quickly, let's look at what you're going to do for this week. You'll see that you have some work to do there in Week 7. We're in Module 3. On Thursday, you have a discussion post that is a reading response, and then you have a peer response to that due on Sunday by the end of the day. Here's your lineup. Those first two things there in the module are online articles that give you some good background information on flood myths. Now, one of the other things that we're looking for this week is not just the fact that they're so common and the features of flood myths. We also want to look at what do scientists say could be some possible origins for these myths, and that's what you'll find there in the first two. There are lots and lots of ideas that, say, geologists or historians have in terms of pointing to a particular natural or hydrologic event that could have been the catalyst for particular stories. And then you have 3 videos that give you all kinds of good stories. So these should be lots of fun to listen to, stories from all around the world, who was involved, what happened, and what were the consequences. And there you have the link to discussion number 5. I did something different in this module. I actually have never done this before. I came across an article that I think some of you might be very interested in, and I put it there at the bottom. Optional reading, you don't have to, but if you are interested at all in learning about the channeled scablands, which I'll talk about in just a minute, there's a short article that you might want to read. One of the things that you'll learn is that there are many identifiable events throughout history that we can point to and say, some huge event happened here that involved a flood, and then we can connect stories to that event. And if you are in Pullman right now, you are sitting practically at ground zero for one of the most cataclysmic flood events to happen ever in North America. And that was the Ice Age floods, sometimes called the Brett's floods. They were a series of approximately 40 different floods that happened over thousands of years, and they are responsible for so many of the landscape features that we see just right outside of Pullman. So these are oftentimes called the channeled scablands. You'll see there is a map that shows the extent of those floods. So they really covered a great portion of both eastern and western Washington, all the way out to the coast. And if you've been out to Palouse Falls, there you see some really dramatic evidence of these floods. If you haven't been out there, well, make a day trip out of it. Go check it out and see what sorts of things have happened that would be the origin of some of these really interesting flood myths. Your discussion this week, I think, would be fun. I've created something that I hope you'll enjoy. So you have a two-part reading response. After you have read the articles for this week and watched the videos, I would like you to respond in paragraph form to these questions. So what is one purpose that flood myths could serve in a culture? Why do people tell these stories? Why do scholars believe floods are such a common subject in world mythology? And then I want you to think about the scientific evidence that was presented to you. Describe two pieces of scientific evidence that point to the origin of flood myths or to the origin of one specific myth. That's the first part. The second part of the reading response is to write an original flood myth. So you have a couple of pre-writing activities that you need to do to get set up. I'd like you to go online and find a news report for a flood that happened anywhere in the world within the last 50 years. It can be a small flood, it could be something large and catastrophic. As I say, it might even be one that you personally experienced. List first of all the link to that news article, because I would like to read it myself, and then list the details from that event. So things like the location, the weather, the date, the time, the type of terrain, the damage that was caused. Now take those details and then add the supernatural aspects of a myth. So who were the deities that were involved, and what were they displeased about? What were people doing that caused them to send this flood? Let's see. Are there any heroes that stepped into action to help save people or protect property? Okay, and what was the outcome? So think about the structure of the myths that we have read or listened to. They're usually very short, but right to the point. And they often have a very lyrical structure or rhythm. They use very lovely descriptive language. So put some work into this. Make this a really interesting, enjoyable myth to read. So post that by Thursday, and then go online, and I would like you to read 3 of your peers' flood myths. So I would like you to respond. This isn't a critical feedback, right? We're not telling them what they need to do to fix it. So what do you particularly enjoy or like about their story? What aspects of the flood mythology do you see working in their story? And then I want you to imagine that the two of you are really collaborating on this flood myth. And so if you were there, what would be one more supernatural element or detail that could be added to their myth to take it to the next level? So please post those by the end of the week on Sunday. I've given you a narrative plot structure diagram here, which outlines how you could put together any sort of short piece of creative writing. And this would work great as you're pulling together a short myth. You could use this for your flood myth. You could also use this for your creation myth that you are working on as the culmination of this cosmic myth unit. So let's quickly go over it. You'll see it starts out with, here it says, an orientation. I think of it as giving your reader or listener some context or some background to the story that is about to unfold. Where is this place? When is this? What's going on? What does the landscape look like? You have to set the stage, so to speak, for the story that's about to happen. And then you have some rising action. You have some conflicts or some complications. So in this case, what's happening? What are people doing that would cause the displeasure of the gods? Do the gods communicate with these people? How does the tension or energy begin to rise in this story? And it all leads up to a point of climax. And in this case, obviously, it would be the flood or the deluge. What happens in this point of highest energy? The falling action, it would be the response of the characters to this event. What happens? What do they do in order to survive? This is where your hero, if you choose to include one, might step into action, helping to save people or come up with a solution. And then the resolution would be, as this thing has now come to an end, what have people learned? How have they reacted or responded? So this is then where the story comes to an end. So there you have it. Think about using that to help you create this flood myth.